a man lies in a hole in the ground. He waits to see if tonight is the night that he dies. He waits, and we wait, because this is a film. He gazes at the moon, not knowing if this is the last night he will ever be. And then the film ends. But then the film doesn't end. And the man is just an actor. And the director is on screen, and the extras are enjoying a brief moment of serenity in their real lives. But this isn't real life, because this is also just a film. And then the film ends. This is Taste of Cherry, the Palme d'Or winner by Iranian filmmaker Abass Kiarostami. A film not only about that tenuous edge separating life and death, but about a boundary that divides fiction from non-fiction, the blurred line between cinema and reality. Now, on the surface, this may be an obvious distinction. We know what the difference is between cinema and reality. What we live is real, and what we see is cinema.
آقا نمیدونید این کاسه کجاست؟ خیلی ممنون. خیلی تشکر میکنم. زحمت کشید.
Or so we assume. We take for granted that the line that distinguishes film from real life is immediately recognizable. But is that really the case? Can we, with absolute certainty, know where one ends and the other begins?
کات چرا جواب نمیدی؟ وقتی میگه خدا قوت بگو سلامت باشید.
To answer this, we may immediately jump to the ultimate example of how to destroy that line between cinema and our world, the breaking of the fourth wall.
You know nothing of my work. You mean my whole fallacy is wrong. How you ever got to teach a course in anything is totally amazing.
Boy, if life were only like this.
We all know what this is. Those moments in which our world is acknowledged by the subject of a film so that that invisible fourth wall that separates us no longer does. But fourth wall breaks just disregard our separation. They rarely say anything about it. It's not a technique I would say sufficiently shows the totality of the relationship between us and the things we watch. It acknowledges it and then moves on. I think when we look at this murky area where the film and our world coincide, it should be viewed more as a spectrum where one gradually transitions into the other. And it's with director Abass Kiarostami that we see a filmmaker as its ultimate practitioner.
خب حق با شماست. ولی حالا چون نشون نمیدن مام نگیریم؟
خب پخش که نمی‌کنی از برامون. یه دو فیلم هم که دادی اونم شبکه دو پخش کرد. برامون نگرفت. برامون فرقی نمی‌کنه.
بچه‌ها بالاخره شما چی میگین؟ ما فیلم بگیریم یا نگیریم؟
بگیریم.
We suspend our disbelief for cinema. We do for all art. We have to. Because if we remember that the person in the portrait isn't real, or the person on screen is just performing, the whole illusion comes crashing down. So we tend not to. So then, how much reality can cinema really capture? Isn't the planning and recording of something by its very nature artificial? Is this video fundamentally a futile exercise just because I said that the area is a spectrum when the reality is it's two sides of a coin? Film is fake. So then the closest we could get to reality is the genre of documentary, because at least documentaries are the cinematic means of capturing real life. The stuff we see here isn't planned.
Bingung sekalian masuk dalam tubuh.
Jelas, apa yang dirasakan orang yang disiksa Bang Noir jauh lebih buruk dari ini karena Bang Noir tahu ini hanya film. Mereka tahu bahwa mereka akan dibunuh.
For the most part. Because the thing is, someone is still behind the camera. The act of showing real footage can be altered to be seen in a certain light. Even documentaries, as an attempt to tell a real story, have to appear through the lens of a creator. But does that then mean that what we see isn't real? Godard said, "Film is 24 truths per second and every cut is a lie." Anything that occurs in front of the camera is real because we saw it happen, but it's editing wherein those images are manipulated. With an edit, I can remove any information that doesn't coincide with my worldview. I can bring something into existence that wasn't there. For Godard, the director is a god of the world, and that level of omnipotence means that you're almost tyrannical in your level of control. Whether you intend to or not, the act of completing a film comes with a manipulation of images to tell the story that you want. It brings us all the way back to the Kuleshov effect. Images themselves possess no story. It's in the context of those images that meaning is given. A man is only smiling sinisterly when we make him.
Girl in a bikini, he smiles. What is he now? The dirty old man.
Haneke, on the other hand, says that film is 24 lies per second in an attempt to find the truth. And it's quite clear to see how Haneke's perspective differs. Haneke, as a director, is almost detached from the sentimentalities of other filmmakers. To him, film is nothing more than the recording of fiction and the performance of reality. How often do we not only see characters staring at screens and various communication devices, reminding us that we are people watching a screen, watching people watching a screen? And so often does he then take what we're watching and make it become a screen before we even knew.
Et en même temps, il y a plusieurs choses que moi je veux dire. La première, c'est que...
Stop, ça devient trop théorique là, Coupa, on est d'accord sur ça. Et va voir plus loin quand Tolé parle de l'homosexualité, c'est vers...
En même temps, il y a...
C'est vers 30.
In these two directors, the fundamental idea of reality is warped as soon as that reality is placed in front of a camera. And this is nothing new. You know that people act differently in front of any camera. We project to the world the version the world wants to see of us, not necessarily the real us. But somewhere between these two polarities, do we as an audience have to acknowledge the artifice? We know that what we're watching is something completely fabricated, or at the very least, formed through the lens of another. The question is, how far are we willing to accept a level of truth? Kiarostami himself made documentaries. Homework follows the children from the region where he made Where's the Friend's House. Does then the realness of this documentary undercut the fiction of the film? Because one is less real than the other, does that make it less important? His most famous documentary is Close Up, the story of Hussein Sabzian, a man with an unyielding passion for cinema, who one day, when a woman on a bus believed he was filmmaker Mohsen Makhmalbaf, he went along with it and pretended he was. This minor deception resulted in a court case, which the documentary shows. But what it also shows are those same parties recreating the event that happened in between sequences of the court case. Makhmalbaf himself makes an appearance in the film, and we question at what point the fiction ends and the reality begins. These people actually did this. They felt things when this was going on and undoubtedly felt something reliving this whole experience. And the only conclusion that we can draw is that even the participants of the film don't know where the film ends themselves. One of the most popular instances of recent film history are inclusions of the film incorporating such real-life reactions. They're more like trivia pieces, but effective nonetheless. When Aragorn kicks the helmet in The Lord of the Rings, and actor Viggo Mortensen broke his toe, his scream as such became one of legitimate agony. In Django Unchained, Leonardo DiCaprio actually cut his hand and proceeded to utilise it as part of the scene, making it even more effective. This would be an example of good fortune, playing around with the scene, allowing the brief moments of reality that emerge fortuitously to become a part of the mise-en-scène. After all, even though all of this is pretending, actors are still real people going through the action of emotion, attempting to inhabit it. To feel anger, sadness, or happiness, sometimes it may be best to actually feel it. But at the same time, this is something alien to the diegetic world of the film. The blood that we see is DiCaprio's. The pain that we see is Viggo Mortensen's. This is just the lie that Godard and Haneke spoke of, contextualized in a way to appear as though it belongs to the character, when secretly it doesn't. But then again, no emotion belongs to the character because they're not real. And so sometimes the best way for films to make their fiction more powerful is to break down all pretense and own that there is a world of non-fiction outside of here.
No, it is a film. Zumba camera.
Only then can we see the truth in a lie. American Splendor has Paul Giamatti play comic artist Harvey Pekar, whose eccentric way of living is so unbelievable until Giamatti actually sits backstage and watches the real-life people out of character before returning back to the narrative.
You're right. You do your stick figures so you could plan for your next comic book. Yeah. Because I've seen many of your stick figures and that seems to be pretty interesting. Yeah. Chocolate jelly beans. I'm going to have to try one. Go ahead.
The biopic genre is full of these examples that add a sense of validity to the story we see, whether it's showing documentary footage of the real-life person we've been following, commemorating and eulogizing that person, or to present a piece of footage into the public consciousness in a way you hadn't thought of before. There is some yearning for truth in cinema, as though it makes it more meaningful, more relevant if you can say that something to a certain degree really happened. And it's only through wiping away that veneer, a momentary collapse of the suspension of disbelief, that we seem to be capable of doing that.
True Crime Stories has been brought to you through the courtesy of J. Edgar Hoover and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This brings to a close the authenticated story of the Osage Indian murders.
But if this is the case, then why have fiction at all? Why even suspend our disbelief? The history of cinema acting as a kind of social utility is dictated by that film's impact on the world around us. By displaying that cinema isn't isolated within the screen, but that its images can seek to transmit outside of its borders, then it transcends the medium and becomes something so much more. Uncut Gems takes real-life events and contextualizes them into a maybe not thriller, where we ask what happens when a fictional character's livelihood is dictated by events that we've already experienced in the real world. Battle of Algiers breaches those similar boundaries to points that we can't tell what parts are footage from a revolution and what are fictionalized events. It shoots in a way to replicate real life, so that even if real life were to take over, could we see a difference? This constant blurring is an attempt to display a kind of importance to cinema. It emphasizes its fictionality to display precisely how important that fictionality is. We don't need cinema to be real, it innately dialogues with reality. The question is, how much of that dialogue do we show? Which brings us back to the work of Abass Kiarostami and the fundamental axiom that his work explores. Does film have an obligation towards the truth? To look upon Kiarostami's images, you find a naturalistic perfection. They're so effortlessly pure, beautiful, stationary compositions where life goes on around us. I often believe that the aspects of art that capture our focus are its imperfections, the texture of an imperfect voice over complete clarity. And this seems to also be the case for Kiarostami. When the image plays out as perfectly as possible, there must be some schism, like accepting that sometimes the sound fails.
آقا صدا قطع شد. چه؟ صدا قطع شد. یعنی چی؟ یعنی چه قطع شد؟ یا از فیشه یا از میکروفون گردنی آقای محمل باست.
It's in these imperfections that displays the fragility of a piece of art, that all of the meaning and beauty within the image is able to shine through in spite of hardship. The film stock may falter, a car may stall on a hill, but only to roll into the path of the person walking up it. This good fortune leads to a solidarity between fiction and non-fiction where both truly intersect with one another, and it allows within the film for a thing to become something else. If we were to pick a word to describe Kiarostami's work, it would be poetic. And he does this by focusing on the details of an image. Kiarostami's detail is like a childlike perception of the world. Children pay attention to details because that's their way of learning. By honing in on the specifics, we understand more about the whole. Kiarostami does for live action what Miyazaki did for animation, display the importance of childlike innocence through detail. Details are so personal, there's so much drama attached to a gesture. How do two things unrelated interact with one another? Because it's in the friction in an image in which we're drawn, not the harmony. Something to disrupt, a tree on top of a zigzagging path, an almost imperceptible moving figure across a landscape. The real world to an unreal world. This is the true harmony of image.
The reasons that he loved poetry was exactly his view on cinema. And sometimes you read a poem 2 years from now and you have a completely different take on that poem. And he very much enjoyed that you are part of the creation of that. That's why I think people think his cinema is very poetic. It's not just about having a beautiful scene, it's about leaving you enough room as an audience to have your own interpretation.
Kiarostami's influence from Iranian poetry and haiku is clear in how he crafts a film. There's so much space and emptiness in his images, and yet within this emptiness, there's always something to anchor us, a single isolated subject, salient, with enough room around it to offer meditation and contemplation. Kiarostami was a painter amongst many things, and his ability to focus the viewer's eyes shows complete mastery, even if that focus is the tiniest speck on the image. All of his images are about focusing our attention somewhere, to find order within the unordered universe. Think of the frames within frames, his ability to reinforce gestures as important through isolating them. Kiarostami seeks how we can make the spectacle become the intimate. The landscapes of Kiarostami feel like an appendage of the filmmaker himself. It's one thing to put a personality onto a setting, however, to simply allow the surroundings to be can offer a true sense of serenity. And Kiarostami allows nature to simply be in his work, because nature does not lie. Nature is real. The space is not an actor within the film, it will be regardless. His short film, The Birth of Light, gives credence to this. The filming of a sunrise from darkness shows that nature is enough. So much of Kiarostami's work is made up of driving sequence. There's a repetition. We see the same cars driving along the same roads. We return time and time again to the same landscapes. The dialogue is banal, but with this we're lulled into the peace of nature. There's a hypnotic quality to it. The earth tones ground the image in a reality of a world that we recognize, a complete recognition to the point that it can overwhelm the image. These are the stories that Kiarostami is interested in. But then we should ask, to tell the story of a life, what parts do you tell? What parts do you leave out? For Kiarostami, this question is fundamental. What is the narrative explanation of life? The retelling of a story, regardless of how expansive, must be confined to a singular point of view. Even if that viewpoint attempts some manner of multitude of perspectives, it's still contained in a singular piece. In Kiarostami films, this is done through ellipses, disembodied characters unrelated to the plot that become momentarily our sole focus.
سیگار من دارم. برای سیگار مقصد نبود. ما میخواییم بچه تعبیر اجتماع درست در بیاد. در موقعی را که من بچه بودم.
These asides occur all the time in Kiarostami's work. Our character will disappear from view only for a new tertiary story to emerge organically out of nowhere, and Kiarostami never disregards its importance. But are these things really unrelated? The totality of a story is everything it interacts with, even those parts you are unaware of. Is a complete story not just the constant happening of everything that occurs around us, real and fictional? Kiarostami takes traditional storytelling and discards it in favour of these gaps and spaces. Life Goes On is a journey about trying to find boys that may have been caught in an earthquake, and we never know if we see them or not. Through the Olive Trees follows a boy asking a girl to marry him only for them to be out of reach when we hear her answer. Kiarostami approaches narrative as something fluid, something that cannot be captured with finality. Just because one thread reaches its end doesn't mean that another won't continue. He treats action the same. So much of it occurs on the edge or just outside of the reference of the protagonist. For instance, when a conversation ends, we continue to watch the person no longer a part of that conversation. Because life will continue with or without us, and the very act of storytelling is just a glimpse of a fragment of that story. And there's something beautiful knowing that everything we encounter, all of our real life and all of our fiction, can be contained into one grand narrative. The form and content of a Kiarostami film match one another perfectly. He likes to bridge that gap between the screen and our world. Look at the Kulker trilogy. We have a film, then a fictionalized documentary on searching for the characters of that film, and then a fake behind the scenes of that documentary where real people play fictionalized versions of other real people from the earlier films. He cares not for sound continuity. If a person is slightly out of range of the microphone, they'll sound out of range, and we will be reminded that this is a film. In Through the Olive Trees, we're supposed to see the behind the scenes of Life Goes On, yet the clapperboard is for Through the Olive Trees, and so the constant layers of unreality that are placed right in front of our face is so fluid that ultimately it doesn't matter what parts are real. If there's some pursuit of truth, isn't that enough?
Like he was improvising depending on situation all the time. He did the same thing in Under the Olive Trees. What he did was he told him, don't you think like this, the world would have been a better place if rich people married poor people, literate people married illiterate people? And says, yes, maybe. And then at night he tells one of the people in the crew, says, so Hossein had a very interesting idea. So he tells the story. And then the next day he tells like the director of photography that Hossein has a great idea, very interesting idea. And this time Hossein knows what he's talking about. So he tells the story again. He does that 5-6 times. And then when he talks about that in the film, in the back of that truck, it is his own words. And it is not acting, it has become his philosophy.
Kiarostami seeks to invoke within us something deep about the nature of art. That art and life are symbiotic, and it's not its artificiality that breaks it, even when he appears on screen as a fictional Kiarostami. Storytelling is a deconstruction of reality. It's a brief respite from reality in order for us to idealize it. Everything you watch isn't real, but that doesn't matter. Something about it lingers, and it can teach us even when... Everything you watch isn't real, but that doesn't matter. Something about it lingers, and it can teach us even if we expose that there's someone behind it all manipulating the story. Isn't this just one lens of the totality of the story that we cannot grasp? The line between cinema and reality will always blur. Something about it lingers, and it can teach us, even if we expose that there is someone behind it all manipulating the story. Isn't this just one lens of the totality of the story that we cannot grasp. The line between cinema and reality will always blur, and there'll always be more and more layers unfolding as we move further away. But no matter how far we step back, the edges never seem to appear, and we find ourselves in a singular story that connects all of us.